Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to There's No Business Like. I'm Katie Miller with Michigan Maven Creative Associates, and I am in the studio today with my friends, Danielle.
Hey, it's Danielle Van Hook from the Alden in McLean, Virginia.
Brian.
Brian Zelmer from Bardavon Presents in New York.
Kevin.
Kevin Maynard coming at you from Tallahassee with opening nights at Florida State University.
And Josh.
Last and least, Josh Benson coming to you from Marion, Illinois at the Marion Cultural and Civic Center.
Well, I am excited for our episode today. I'm going to bring you a conversation with three colleagues from the state of Montana. It's the first time we've done a state-centric episode looking at the ecosystem of an entire state. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Before we do, I want to ask you all, what is your favorite road trip you've ever taken?
When I was about to start the Rialto in Colorado, I was pretty sure I was going to take the job, but I was invited to come out and do one last in-person interview. And it was more so for me to interview them and see the theater and, make sure that, we all gelled. And it was far enough away, I decided to just put the family in the van and we did a road trip. We stopped in Chicago and spent a little time in Chicago. Then we hit a cheese shop on the way through Wisconsin, of course. And we hit the Badlands and we hit Mount Rushmore. And then we went through Wyoming and just all these beautiful things. We spent a week in Colorado. We, of course, saw the Rialto in Loveland and I fell in love, of course, with it. And we saw some old friends that my wife and I, when we lived there, when she was dancing with Colorado Ballet, we caught up with a lot of them, and then drove back down through the mid of the country through Kansas and Missouri and all the way. And we stopped in St. Louis and had a horse carriage ride through St. Louis and did the Arch and all that. So it was a really fun 2-week road trip that I don't think we could do again, but everything was just the right opportunity to do that.
I love that, Brian.
Me and my friend Josh Dunmeyer and another friend named Drew, we hopped into an old 1980s Grand Marquis, drove all the way from Southern Illinois to New Hampshire, stayed at Josh's mother's house. And we drove through New York City, and this was literally in a few months after getting out of high school.
That's not a recipe for trouble at all.
Oh, it was terrible. And we were supposed to pick up a pickup truck from his mom and drive it back. Literally 35 minutes into the 24-hour drive back, the engine blew up on the pickup truck on the side of the road. We pulled the license plates off of it, left it for dead, and headed back to Illinois.
The only thing better would have been if you pushed it off a cliff or something.
Yes. We could have, because we were literally whenever we pulled off, it was a guardrail and a sheer drop. It could have just been gone. That would have been a great idea.
So my story starts a couple months before I went on this road trip. My second-ish year maybe in Virginia, we had a once-in-a-100-year snowstorm 2 years in a row. And the second year, I was getting real tired of moving to what I thought was the South and getting some Pennsylvania worthy snowstorms. And I was real sad. And I was in my apartment just freezing. And I came up with a plan with my bestie that we were going to buy a Groupon for a beach trip. And so we each put in $50. And we're yeah, in 2 months, we're going to go to the beach. And of course we put off booking it. And once we went around to doing it, all of the dates that you would want to go to, God, where'd we go? Rehoboth Beach? Somewhere over there. Were totally taken. So we had to go the first week in April, which is not beach weather here, the mid-Atlantic region. But we made the best of it. And we had, it was a very short drive. But we wore our winter coats on the beach for a little while. And the Groupon would whenever those were very a very great deal and people were actually looking at that site. It was a 2-night stay at a place called the American, which we all know that was a great spot. It had an indoor pool.
Starting to see why it's so cheap.
It had a really cool green indoor pool.
Yeah, we saw police activity through the windows one night when we were floating in the pool.
Surprised.
It was great. We had a great time. But we also got an quote, I'm putting this in air quotes, an international buffet at the casino on the way out of town, which of course we stopped and ate at.
What
we got
made it
there, we were like,
international?
wow, why did we do this?
It had French fries.
Disgusting. Oh gosh. And there was some other super random thing like that we got as a part of this Groupon. And it was all we could afford at the time. And we made the most of it. And it was just like a very solid bestie road trip that I would do again in a heartbeat.
It sounds amazing, honestly.
When I was finishing up high school, my buddy RJ Ryan and I bought a bus and converted it into an RV, and then drove up to Canada and then down the East Coast. Stopped in New York, Boston, Buffalo to eat buffalo wings. Accidentally drove it in downtown Washington, D.C., which I would not recommend because no one was really great at driving that bus. But yeah, like it's something that every time RJ and I get together, like we still quote shit that happened on that trip. Like it was.
Where's the bus now? And did Josh light it on fire?
No, it's been decommissioned and it was parted out.
You pushed it off a cliff.
I mean, that'd have been a sad day. I've actually a Viking funeral for Thomas would have been really great. We would have appreciated that.
Was the bus named Thomas?
No.
Yes.
Okay.
No, that was the other guy on the trip.
He's still alive, but they just want to light him on fire and put him on a boat.
So I grew up in Western Massachusetts and all of my family was in the Midwest. So we are road warriors. My brother and I grew up on long car trips, and my parents were wonderful about taking us everywhere across the country. So I have lots of road trip stories. But I would say my favorite is similar to Brian, sort of a trek across the Midwest and Plains states. So when I was in middle school, my parents planned this trip. My grandmother took the train from St. Louis to Chicago. So from Michigan, we picked her up in Chicago, drove across Wisconsin, went to the Twin Cities, went to the Mall of America, which is like a adolescent's dream in the mid 2000s. So we did Mall of America and then drove all the way across South Dakota and went to Mount Rushmore and the Black Hills. And that was incredible. It was actually my favorite part of the entire trip. And then down through Kansas and Oklahoma and back to Missouri, dropped off my grandma, and then came back to Michigan. So it was a similar 2-week trip. And one of my favorite memories of this like multi-generational trip with my parents, my grandmother, and my brother and I. So, which actually leads me directly into the conversation we are about to hear today with my friends Chris, Benji, and Emily. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Emily Wolfram, and I'm the Executive Director of the Montana Performing Arts Consortium.
I'm Chris Holmes. I'm the Executive Director of the Montana Arts Council, which is the statewide agency that serves all the arts all across Montana.
I'm Benji Cosgrove. I'm the Executive Director of the Myrna Loy in Helena, Montana. We are a multidisciplinary presenting arts organization.
Excellent. Well, my friends, welcome to There's No Business Like. Emily, Chris, and Benji, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today. I am so excited for our first ever state-centric episode of the podcast. This is the first time we're going to talk about sort of the ecosystem of a particular state in live performing arts. So I'm so glad you could join us all today. So first of all, I want to give you just a couple minutes to talk a little bit more about your organizations and give us some context. And then we will dive into the long list of questions I have for all of you. So Chris, why don't you give us a little bit about the Montana Arts Council?
So the Montana Arts Council serves all of the arts organizations and groups of artists and artistic communities across Montana, and also those little tiny towns spread across the landscape that are too small to even have a theater company or an art gallery or any kind of arts organization. We are a state agency, so we serve every person in Montana to the best capacity that we can, including the 7 Indian reservations that we have in Montana. And we are the 4th largest state geographically, with just barely over 1 million people spread across 144,000 square miles. So that is a lot of distance and cows and many, many miles of barbed wire fence to cover.
Well, I had not thought about the number of cows in the state versus people, but that would be an interesting statistic. Emily, what about you? Montana Performing Arts Consortium.
Hi, thanks. The Montana Performing Arts Consortium is a network of performing arts organizations. Most of them are nonprofits, as well as performing artists of all genres and artist agents. And our main goal is to help make sure that all Montana communities have access to really wonderful performing arts programming. And that includes a lot of those tiny little towns that Chris just mentioned. Many of them have their own little community halls or theaters that are at this point historic buildings in their tiny towns, where they still bring the performing arts to their schools and to their community. So this organization, MPAC is what we call it for short. We exist to bring the presenters together to work together to block book artists that tour through Montana. And in pursuit of that, we present our showcase in our conference once a year to get them all together, and also to give artists from Montana and beyond, many beyond Montana, to present their talent if they have interest in touring the state.
Excellent. Well, and I'm excited to talk about block booking with you in a minute, Emily, because that is like the top topic amongst Presenters Consortium. So we will definitely chat about that today. Benji, tell us about the Myrna Loy. I am so fascinated by your organization. Tell us more.
Yeah, so the Myrna Loy is a nonprofit arts organization begun in 1976 as a tiny little independent movie theater. In 1990, we actually acquired the original county jail that sits in Helena and renovated it into a 2-theater space, one with a full stage and lighting and sound system. The other one, just a small screening room theater. And we also asked Myrna Loy, who is was a famous actress who worked basically from the 30s through the 60s. She was born in Helena and lived here until she was about 11. But we went to New York to get her blessing to name it the Myrna Loy in 1990 when we moved into the county jail. And so now we show films every single night of the year, and we present usually between 20 to 30 live performances a year.
That is awesome. No, and it looks like a beautiful building and a super cool venue. So I'm excited to learn more about that today too. All right. So I want to just dive right in and let's just talk about I'm so curious, and I don't know that much about Montana. It's one of the 14 states in the country that I've not had the pleasure of traveling to, but it's at the top of my list. The closest I've gotten is South Dakota. I was like so close, didn't make it. So I just want to know, let's start with, what is the ethos or the vibe of the Montana performing arts scene? So you've given us a little bit of context already, but what would you say, what's the vibe of the scene there in Montana?
You know, I would jump in because before the show started, we were talking about history and the shadow that history casts, or in some ways, how history fertilizes what is growing here now. And one of the things that sets Montana apart from the Dakotas or Idaho or, all the states around us, even Wyoming, is the history that Montana has of really multicultural influences from people all over the world who came here to work in the mines and the forests and the homesteads and the railroads. And our gold rush in Montana happened much later than every place else. And so it wasn't one thing and then another sequentially, but it was this chaos of world cultures kind of coming together in the Northern Rockies and specifically in Montana. So they brought this really eclectic understanding and set of cultural practices themselves. And I think that is one of the most interesting and fundamental things to understand about Montana, is that we're kind of seen as this remote cowboy country, everyone sees Montana through its own lens, but really there's a little bit of everything here. So the audiences are surprisingly hungry for all kinds of arts experiences that the presenters like Benji and the members of Impact work really, really hard to bring into this remote country where, towns are like 90 and 100 miles apart, unlike New Hampshire or, the rural South or whatever.
I totally agree. And I was thinking about that earlier, and it kind of reminded me of my experience as a new resident and being a new resident in Montana about 9 years ago when I moved here. So I moved here from Chicago, and I've lived other places in the country. And I'm still learning about Montana in a lot of ways. And I feel like as a new resident here, I felt like my neighbors had a lot of pride in what was offered here and what they produced here. There's a lot of local pride in the things that are homegrown, talent products otherwise, but they're also really generous and curious and neighborly. And, they do have that hunger for new experiences and other things. And there's like this really wonderful like curiosity and appreciation when you also come to share what you bring. And I think that that presenters frequently talk about the wonderful experiences that they have when, a jazz group from Atlanta comes to share what they have, or say like a different group from maybe a different part of Canada comes to share another culture that is like a Latin culture or whatever the indigenous culture that they bring. So there is a really great appreciation for different things here, while at the same time there is that really wonderful local pride.
That's great. Benji and Chris, is maybe a question for you. To me, building off of that, it seems in my little bit of research I did, it seems like the Montana art scene is very artist centric. Like Chris, most of your board members are artists. I didn't see too many administrators or other types of folks on your board list. And Benji, looking at the artists that you're presenting, a lot of them seem local or regional in nature. There weren't any names that I recognized from a national performing arts scene. So it just seems very artist centric and maybe very regional and local. And like Emily was saying, like focused on that. So can you speak to how you really uplift local artists or focus on that and how they're interacting with venues, schools, arts councils, things like that?
I think one of the big differences for the arts in Montana is that the people who are running the venues and presenters, the vast majority of them are artists. It's not like Montana has an economy where as an artist you can go ahead and make money just doing your art. You have to find some other thing. I know for me, I'm a writer, and I started working at the Myrna Loy about 15 years ago. And it was because I needed a job and I wanted to be in the arts. And I think not only does it teach artists how to become presenters or work in venues, it also forces us to cobble together our staffs and find people who are interested in expanding out of just their art into, other business opportunities that the arts can provide. Almost everyone on our staff is an artist. We have musicians, we have visual artists, we have filmmakers. It's awesome. And as they come into our organization, we want to both make sure that they have time to work on their own art as well as help other artists in the area, in the region. And we do present worldwide and national artists here as well. But what it does is the people that work for us know what artists need. They know how to help them do the best show that they can possibly put on. And I think that's where the Myrna Loy is especially special in Montana, is because we're an organization made of artists that then promotes art.
That's really cool. I love that. That feels very different from where I am at in Michigan, where it's like you can just be an administrator. You don't have to have any special artistic talent to be an arts administrator. So that feels very different from the environment that I'm in. Chris, what about you? You work with all sorts of artists, all sorts of administrators, venues across the state. Does it feel artist-centric to you as well?
Well, it does until I think 2023, when our property values started shooting up beyond what Montanans could afford. We had the largest per capita number of painters of any state in the country. Per capita, I mean, among the million people. Partly because it's so affordable to live here, or it was before just the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and partly I think because of the grandeur of the landscape. Those are visual, that number applied to visual artists. And there are so many musicians, as I think there are in all pockets of, especially of rural Montana or of rural America, really, that I think there are opportunities for musicians to be sort of part-time around the corners of their working life. And like Benji says, partly because they have to, because it's really hard to make a living. And if you are, like, we have bands in Helena or ensembles in Helena that are really, really good, but Helena is a small town. And if they want to get beyond, to even grow beyond this little region of Montana, then they have to take this giant leap to be a touring organization. Right. And that's a big leap.
Because the next gig is like 90 miles away. So you have to hit the road. Yeah.
And you have to plan maybe 6 of those to even make your next couple of months worthwhile. So there is this struggle that artists have to make, I think, between just being kind of a local neighborhood artist or a musician or whatever, and then taking that big leap to get beyond.
Interesting.
So the relationships with the arts organizations and with the statewide arts council, I think, are really, really important. I kind of have said for many years, Montana is really rich, but all of our wealth is in relationships.
Yes. So then, Chris and Emily, how do you go about building those relationships across the state? Because we've already referenced a couple times the geography and how difficult that can be to traverse. So Emily with presenters and Chris with, all the different types of organizations you support. What does that relationship building look like? And what are sort of the challenges in that?
Emily, I want to hear from you first, because MPAC has been really important in holding those relationships together, so that it's like you guys have to do the work and all of your members sort of ride along with you. So.
And MPAC is 40 years old, right? You just celebrated an anniversary.
Yeah. I think we're on to conference or showcase in conference number 43, I think is next. So yeah, MPAC has been around for over 40 years. And that is an interesting part of the answer, because those relationships and the network itself and what it's made up of, or who it's made up of, has changed over that time. In the beginning, it started out as a collective of very much some of the biggest presenters in the biggest cities in Montana. And that's what got the momentum going. And that group collaborated with a lot of purpose to bring great tours to the state 40 years ago. And over time, other presenters or nonprofit organizations were started. Some of that was actually influenced by the leadership of MPAC. Like they helped get them on their feet. And it became a network that had a lot of rural presenters, which really does represent a lot of the space and the population of the state. A lot of the towns and communities are in hard to reach places. And so there was a very strong focus on supporting those rural presenters. And one program that was introduced was the Presenter Development Program, which actually just is it provides small amounts of financial support, depending on what resources available are to rural not presenting organizations, to help them cover the costs and make sure that they continue doing really quality programming and doing outreach, and they're able to do the promotion and the management they need to continue existing. So for many years, that rural aspect was like a big part of this network. And in recent years, we've seen some of those bigger presenters from big cities or bigger communities return, which has been really wonderful. And because we've reconnected with the idea that we can serve both the small organizations and the big ones in big cities, and we can all work together to do even more, especially if we've got those bigger presenters that are leading a block and when we're doing block booking. And of course, when the artists come to showcase, they really like to see more presenters and more opportunities. So the relationship has been evolving. And lately, since I've been in this position now, I'm going into my third year. I feel like a lot of it has been about just asking people what they need, because the world has changed so much and so fast. So just staying in touch with people and asking them how things are going and what's working for them and what the biggest challenges are and how they can help. Sometimes they'll present a challenge that MPAC or I can't really address at that time, but it's good to know just in case an opportunity comes up later on to address it or to find a solution together.
Chris, what about you? What about those relationships and that networking across the state?
Well, what I found my favorite way to do that is just get in the car and drive, because road trips across Montana are about the most fun part of my job. And people here really care that you took the trouble to show up in person. And I feel that's true of, when an Arts Council staff member comes to town and organizes a conversation with 2 or 3 arts organizations, but it's also true when the artists are touring. And, you have a jazz player from New York who got on the plane at 3:30 in the morning and flew into Helena or Missoula, and you can't get there with just one trip. You have to, there are many legs to get to Montana if you're flying. And they roar in, exhausted and smelly at sound check, and they clean up afterwards and they step out on stage. I think the audiences here know you have worked so hard to get in front of us that they start out just being so appreciative and warm and ready to just take the ride with the artists. And I think I have found the same to be true when I pull up in my dusty old car and I've driven across to Miles City or something. They are just really enthusiastic and grateful. And they also, it's one of the things that I think presenters love about Impact, that here's an opportunity for everybody to show up in their dusty cars and just be in the room together. And it's amazing how powerful that is, to just be in the room together and get beyond the, oh, how awful are things for you? Oh, yeah, it's really hard. And then get to,
Yes.
to the more fun part of the conversation.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I can't, Emily, I'm sure you'll echo this, but I've had that exact experience where you finally get in the room with your colleagues and you do the everything's terrible. And then you get to the good stuff and it feels so good to be together in one space. So Benji, as a presenter, how do you interact and your colleagues as presenters interact with MPAC and, your other service to the field orgs? And what is that relationship building like for you as a presenter? You are in a more populous area, but you have lots of colleagues that are spread out across the state.
Yeah, well, the best thing, like Chris said about MPAC, is just being in the room with other colleagues. We don't see them very often because they're all so far away and spread out. So I see other presenters that live in Helena or close by, but that's really it, other than MPAC. So it's a great resource not only to see talent that's willing to tour in Montana, which not all are. It is not always easy to find enough venues to create a tour through the state. So it's awesome to be able to sit and really evaluate talent and what you think your audience would like in one place over a couple of days. So the relationships of MPAC are amazing. And just the fact that Emily works so hard to find artists willing to come to Montana and do these small tours is fantastic. So it's a huge help. Absolutely.
So Benji, can you talk to me a little bit about that booking process from a presenter perspective? So how are you going about booking those between 20 and 40, presented artists every season. Does it start with a conversation at the MPAC conference? Are you reaching out to other venues? Are you working with agents from across the country? How does your booking process work as a rural Montana presenter?
My booking process is sort of all of the above. It's great to be grounded in artists that are willing to come to Montana, but I deal with national agents all the time. Our budget is probably in the higher tier that goes to MPAC. So I do have the ability to bring an artist in solely to play the Myrna Loy if it makes sense for our audience and our staff. I also have gone to Arts Northwest and APAP before to look at artists to bring in as well. The nice thing about MPAC for me is having the ability to keep track of these artists that want to play and being able to call them up myself, as opposed to having agents reach out to you and being flooded with, 40 emails every morning from random presenters and whoever represents Tony Danza. I have to just delete most of them. So it really is nice to have a face-to-face conversations with not only the other presenters, but some of the agents that come with the acts at MPAC.
So Benji, do you find that you're the hub for a lot of tours for artists or venues that are similar to you? There's like 5 or 6 hubs that you really sort of like, people come to you first and say, hey, thinking about this, or you reach out to an artist and the tour sort of spider webs off of you and maybe a handful of others?
Yeah, I would say there's probably 5 or 6 venues in the state that can kind of start a block booking tour. So I will, if I find an artist and they email and say, hey, what other venues are around? Then I've reached out to Emily before to say, hey, here's a couple of venues. This is like, here's the budget range for this artist. Can you give me like 3 or 4 in different cities that may be interested? Or I reach out to the larger, more established ones that are in Billings, Bozeman, Missoula, Butte, our bigger towns that I know can handle it, both budgetary and technically. And so, and I get those calls from those organizations as well. Mm-hmm. So it definitely is, I could start a block book. I could join one, so either it works sort of both ways from the larger venues. And then once we establish sort of an anchor for that tour, I just give them a list of folks that they should reach out to. And it usually, 1 or 2 or 3 bite. And so they have a nice little tour where they can go, to 4 or 5 places in Montana over in a week. And it's great.
Nice. So Emily, when we say block booking, do we actually mean block booking, or are we talking routed tours? How do you all define block booking, and how does that end up working through MPAC? Because we know in the industry, everyone says block booking, but they generally mean is routing, right? Are you actually talking about blocking when 5 or 6 come together, you negotiate discounts and so on and so forth?
And I think that, as far as I know, because I'm not like part of those conversations, but from the gist of what I get is that happens after we have our showcase and we have our booking meeting where everybody's in the room really excited and ready to start making plans, it does feel like both processes in a sense. I don't know how much. But like ideally we would get presenters all in a room to present a big package. But I think sometimes they will get as close as picking a period, and then it becomes like a little bit more like independently negotiated with individual artists and agents. And I get the impression that that gives the artist or the agent a little bit more like control over the process, which I don't argue with them having. So yeah, I think both. And it kind of depends, but maybe Benji can speak more to like what the bigger presenters do. I think because I'm speaking mostly about like the smaller rural organizations.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a hybrid. And now, Katie, you see that none of us have an arts administration degree because we don't even really know what we're talking about. But it's definitely a hybrid where I will have talks with other venues and say, okay, what are you paying this guy? And they're, say, 500 seats. And I'm saying, okay, I bet they would take 2,000 less I'll make an offer if you guys are going to make an offer, and then we'll make offers together or with a threesome. And then next thing you know, we all have the artists coming at different price points over that week. So I don't think we ever I don't ever call like 4 or 5 venues and put together a package and say, let's offer this artist $25,000. I'm going to, pay a fifth. You're going to pay a sixth. He'll pay, a quarter. We don't do it quite like that. So
you all are in line with the rest of the country and saying we want a block book, but never actually making it happen.
Cool.
Yes.
We might have to ask the Canadians about how they do it. I think
the Canadians have it figured out. We got to talk to them more about that.
They have a method. Part of the equation is that with those really small rural organizations who it's kind of like they're a big part of why MPAC exists. There are a handful of bigger organizations like the Myrna Loy, like the Alberta Bear in Billings that are able to go to Arts Northwest, and that's really wonderful, or APAP, or a bigger conference. But there are actually so many more that do not have the means to send a representative to something like that. But they can make a long road trip to somewhere in Montana for a weekend when they're not doing their day job, because they're usually volunteers. And for those smaller rural organizations, they may have their plans for the next season worked out, so they know what the limitations of their own budget, and they know what they can offer to artists, and so they might not have as much like wiggle room to change what they offer based on what 5 other presenters decide to do. So it just they have different things to work with in that regard too.
Before we leave presenter and booking land for a second, Benji, I do want to ask you, what challenges have you seen in presenting? We were having lots of conversations around the cost of touring, geography, travel costs have gone, through the roof. So we've sort of been talking about how it's difficult to get artists to Montana in the first place. How has that changed since the pandemic for you and other presenters like you? Like what are those challenges, and how are you working around them or overcoming them?
I mean, I think we're probably not unique in the post-pandemic problems. Audience numbers have gone down. People are just worried about being in theaters together, especially when they're sold out. Another thing that is unique to Montana, though, is what I would call the Yellowstone Effect, where the Taylor Sheridan TV show has suddenly been a huge advertisement for Montana. And so we have a lot of people and a lot of money moving into the state, which means much bigger and much more frequent corporate concerts, especially in the larger areas, more festivals. And so what it's done to at least the Myrna Loy is it's forced us to have to really calculate, like, how much can we spend on an artist? What kind of grants do we have that can support them? How many people do we think are going to come to this show? And do those financials make sense for us? It's become harder because there's these other options to spend your entertainment dollar as an audience member. You can drive up to Missoula and you can go to the Kettle House Amphitheater, which seats, 5,000 maybe. And you can see, the Rolling Stones, or you can see Elton John, and so those tickets cost $300, $400, $500. You could spend $500 and see every show at the Myrna Loy in one season, so that has happened post-pandemic to Montana, and it's a coincidence because it isn't caused because of the pandemic, but the last 5 years have gotten increasingly difficult for live performance because of that. And we're also an independent movie theater, which I won't get into that, but our audience have absolutely died for theater. Yeah. So that's been hard on us as well.
That is so interesting. And Chris, maybe you have some insight into this looking statewide, the influx of money and corporate presence into the state, while audiences for the arts just in general and culture institutions have been dropping post-pandemic. So are you seeing more private funding opportunities? Are they making investments in the cultural world of Montana? Or is it like Benji saying they're sort of developing their own stuff for their own people? Like what is that doing to the economy and to the cultural sphere?
Yeah, the tendency of audiences to go to a bigger venue to see a name that they recognize, somebody that they've heard on Spotify or that they're already fans of, it has grown. So those audiences are getting huge, and it's more and more of a struggle for those organizations that are trying to introduce you to a new, exciting ensemble that you've never heard of before. Or I think even in a lot of cases, classical music is getting harder. I don't know, Emily, you would know more about what's happening to the classical audiences, but there's definitely there's definitely the influx of money that is making an uneven impact across Montana. And a lot of the big money people who have moved here, this is their second or third home. So no, they're not making investments in the community. They're making investments in their experience in the community. Some are very thoughtfully investing in the community where they have purchased a home and have moved and are really trying to make a difference in their town, but may not quite yet know how to reach out beyond the valley that they moved into or the town that they moved into. So it's still very uneven and it's evolving. And Montana is such a funding desert to begin with. There just aren't that many grant opportunities that are available in Montana. There's no big corporate entities that have giant foundations. There is not a lot of money that is centered in Montana. So those grant opportunities are small usually and pretty far between. So our attention at the Arts Council has been and is increasingly more like, how do we provide the glue and the sinew that makes sure that people can navigate all the changes that are coming and that are happening and at least survive into the future, if not grow.
And who do you partner with on that, or who are you strategizing with in that, Chris, of being the glue kind of holding everything together right now? Is there anybody that you sort of turn to in those moments of panic and go, we need to strategize?
Yeah, we're very strongly connected with every arts council. There are 56 states and jurisdictions that have arts councils. There are regional arts councils. So the one for the entire West and all the Pacific jurisdictions is Creative West, which is centered in Denver. There is the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. They only serve the arts agencies. So we all gather together, the executive directors and staff of these arts agencies across the country, and we're talking to each other all the time. We also just talk to our constituents and our grantees. We give grants to arts organizations and also to individual artists. So all of those communities that sort of come to us through our granting programs, we hear what their needs are and we talk to them about their dreams and wishes and challenges and where they're trying to go. Really, that is the way this work is done, isn't it? To just talk to each other and try to figure out, how can I at least help, even if I can't give you what you need? I at least want to help and understand and connect you to other people who can either give you a leg up or we can share skills and resources.
I would say that.
Oh, go ahead, Emily.
I was just going to add too, Montana has this unique situation that I really appreciate working for the Montana Performing Arts Consortium, where we have a small handful of statewide service organizations that are supported by the Montana Arts Council. So my organization is here as a resource for the performing arts, but we also have one specifically for dance, the Montana Dance Arts Association. We have a network and booking conference for visual arts, MAGDA, which is the Montana Art Gallery Directors Association, and the Montana Association of Symphonic Orchestras for all of our civic orchestras in the state. So, and we all know each other. We connect on some level or another. And this happened recently with all the various things that we have to worry about in 2025, whenever something happens and we know that it affects something beyond, say, presenting organizations in the state. Those are like the 5 people that you have to email if you really want to make a fuss about something, or, make sure that we're all working together as best as we can. And that's, I think, a big part of the connective tissue and this, and working together with our relationships in the state too, which I think is really important.
So would you all say that funding is the biggest challenge for rural presenting?
Yes, absolutely. I think people generally, funders of all stripes, and I'm going to just throw every funder in the world under the bus, think that rural communities are like junior cities. Like, we'll just take what you do in a big city and make it smaller, and then that is rural. But in some ways, the costs are higher for rural communities to try to present something, at the same time that the capacity is higher in some ways and lower in other ways. I like to tell people, when you're coming to Montana, like touring artists and agents, when you're sending an artist to Montana, in some ways you're coming to a different culture. So, like, don't come charging into the Myrna Loy and say, oh, I can't play your Baldwin Grand, I'm a Steinway artist, because we would have to ship a Steinway from Spokane. And we just, we don't operate that way. There are kinds of equipment that artists have come into a stage to perform, and they expect to be able to say, oh, I don't want that kind of electric piano, I want this kind of electric piano. It's like, I'm sorry, this is what we have. Emily tells a really great story about the people who came to perform. You should tell this story, but
the artist was accommodating, which was great, and they really wanted to do the show. And so they traveled to this rural community where they were hired to play for a gala. So there was going to be dinner served and food involved. And this particular rural venue has very little in the way of sound equipment. They usually ask the artist to just bring everything, literally everything. So the artist did that. They got it all set up, and they blew out the breakers like at least 3 times trying to run their stuff. And then they finally figured out the reason was because the crock pot was on the same breaker. They had like an industrial crock pot to feed the people at the gala.
Right.
And, but they did eventually, I think, get it worked out, and they plugged the crock pot in somewhere else. But it can be such a thing as like a crock pot that makes or breaks an experience if you're not being careful.
But then someone comes along and says, oh, you can run an extension cord over to my house and run the crock pot. And, like, it balances out, right? That the power of relationships and that accessibility. And I think that is one thing that makes Montana kind of special, is the accessibility. There aren't too many layers between the bottom and the top here. Benji can call up the mayor of Helena and say, hey, could you come introduce this show because it has some connection with your history? And the mayor will come over and introduce his show. And there aren't a lot of towns in America where I think that could happen. And I think that is true of all of our arts activities throughout the state. There's just so many deep relationships and so much connectivity like that.
And I think that's one of the reasons the Arts Council can have so much impact in Montana, is because we have such a small population. Chris can just about go to every venue in the state over the course of a couple of years, meet everyone, and they're just a great resource for all venues, but me in particular, since they're in Helena. I call Chris all the time and ask questions. And say, hey, can you connect me to someone in this other town? Or, I'm having some issues with this grant. Can you give me some advice? And it's like a phone call. And I can't imagine being a executive director of an arts organization in California or Illinois where you could just call the state agency and talk to the person in charge who has all these relationships and partnerships with people across the state and get that same kind of service. And that is one of, the benefits of being in a state of almost just a little over 1 million people.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked a lot about the challenges, the geography and funding, but what have been some of the major wins in Montana? What are some of the things that you all feel that you're doing right or could be examples for the rest of the country?
I would just say surviving. The Myrna Loy's 48 years, has been here for 48 years, and we've been able to weather the financial crisis, whatever administration happens to be in office, the up and downs of grants, federal and different foundations. The fact that we figure out a way to make it work is sort of my big win at the Myrna, because it is hard. We've been in some dark places, and to come out of that being stronger is one thing that I'm really proud of for our organization.
Yeah, I think a part of that, Benji, is that nobody's really big here. So I always feel like there's kind of an advantage to being not very high up. So when everything collapses, you don't have that far to fall. And it's kind of a homesteader's mindset that's like, we just plug away and we do the work that we do, and we build toward financial sustainability as much as possible. And we help each other out. And we have this mentality that I think is common across the whole northern tier of the United States, that we all know we're going to be the ones that need pushing out of the ditch at one point or another. So you kind of have to help each other through it. But I think the isolation of the rural West does and has made people really recognize how important art and music and storytelling and theater and all the forms of art that speak to us and elevate our souls really is. Because you can't get through a difficult winter. None of us got through COVID. You can't survive out there on a dirt farm in eastern Montana without beauty and inspiration and art. So there is this very deep, long, historic, and very contemporary passion to experience that and to experience something greater than ourselves through art.
I love that. I think that's a perfect note for us to end on. So Benji, Emily, and Chris, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I appreciate you sharing your insight and knowledge about the Montana performing arts scene. It's been such a pleasure to learn more. And I cannot wait to come visit you all. I have to come see the Myrna Loy. I have to come check out Emily's conference. So thank you for all the work that you do. And thanks for being on There's No Business Like.
Thanks, Katie.
So much.
Thank you, Katie.
Can't wait till you visit.
Katie, thanks for bringing us this conversation about our colleagues in Montana. I never contemplated the idea of their difficulties due to their geography and how spread out they are. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the conversations I had with Ken Waldman about his time touring in Alaska and how it's not exactly on the beaten path, that artists usually take. And I love their appreciation for when artists do show up, because they know how it's kind of out of their way, but they're taking time to go and share their art there. So I don't know, it was just very interesting and a lot to think about.
I loved the really at the top when I think it was Chris said something about how our history fertilizes what grows here now, and about like the kind of art and the kind of culture that exists in Montana is not anything that I think I would have guessed or I would have otherwise known about. And really just the overall sort of kind of ethos of that is just how much the three of them love working in those communities and how much the communities are really driving what the venues are themselves. You can just hear it, like in the way that they talk about their state and who they serve and what they do.
Yeah, I think the most interesting conversation that, they really pointed out was the fact of, when we talk about programming in rural communities and sort of that funding model of like, oh, it takes less money, but really like her pointing out, like it actually does take more. I think that that's really interesting and something that we don't talk about. And having programmed in a rural community before, like that is the case. We benefited because, we were in the middle of the country. So people could sort of like accidentally go past. But once you get to some of these outlying areas and in places that don't have other populous zones somewhat nearby, it gets real expensive real quick.
I agree in the same way. And them talking about putting a block together in a Midwest area, like 3 in a block will get a tour there, no problem, because they can get there from pretty much anywhere. But 3 in a block doesn't necessarily get you into Montana, just because they're going to have to go out of their way to get there. So 3 just might not be enough to make it worthwhile. So, you would have to get 5, 6, 7, depending on the show, to make it worth their while to get out there.
They talked about the crock pot incident of 82 or whenever that happened. And I thought that was so cool. Like the idea that, oh, we can run an extension cord from my house, and I could just picture that whole like coming together and making it work. Mm-hmm. It just sounds really cool and a special place to be.
Yeah. Well, and I think that speaks to the power of relationships, right? And Chris, hopping in a car and driving across the state and being able to meet with all the different venues and organizations that the Arts Council serves, I think is really a powerful illustration of stepping out of the community that you're in and making sure to connect with others. So I thought that was a really great example of leadership, frankly, of like really making that effort. The other part of the conversation I thought was really interesting and I think is something I wasn't really aware of, didn't know much about, is the economics of the state, that Yellowstone effect. I've done some additional research. There's a great story on The Indicator from Planet Money on NPR from 2023 that's still incredibly relevant, talking about this Yellowstone effect and the impact on the economy. And even in 2024, there was a lot of journalism done around the fact that the money that's coming into the state is buying ranching lands in the West and pushing people to the East. So the population is physically shifting because of this influx of people buying new homes and buying land and that sort of thing coming in from other parts of the country. So for me, that really is, I think, an interesting problem, because I think in more populous states, you can have multiple concert venues, you can have multiple organizations in a region, and you can all sort of coexist and share audiences. But when you only have 1 million people, and you have an ecosystem that all of a sudden is being completely changed by tourism dollars and people moving and new venues being built, like what does that do to your infrastructure? What does that do to where your audiences go and spend money? And then if you're having a huge migration of people from one end of the state to the other, what does that do to your venues that are in the West? And then what does that mean for your venues in the East? I think it's a really interesting shift of tide for the state. It's like gentrification, right? We talk about gentrification in cities. This is gentrification of rural communities.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on, Katie. I think the interesting thing about that too is also, if it's a quote unquote like Yellowstone effect, like how long do those people then stay, right? Because a lot of times things like that tend to be fads. And so while we say that in a way that it's like, wow, there's an opportunity here of, maybe like some people closer in proximity, or like we have an opportunity for residency activities or like more things in schools. You also have to have in the back of your head, like, how long does this last? And when they were talking about that a little bit, the part that was so disheartening is that there's not any system in place that's taking tax or revenue from some of that and then kind of putting it back into the local artist community there, which is just such a missed opportunity and just really unfortunate. And I hope is something that people can advocate for.
Yeah. I think your point about how long does this last is a really good one, Danielle. How do they capitalize on it now and get some of those dollars into local communities to support what they're doing, but also plan accordingly for the future?
I also wonder, like, if the people that are being displaced and moving towards the east, if they're selling their property and making a substantial amount of money on that property and then moving east and buying lower valued property, as opposed to urban gentrification, which exploits people in those neighborhoods and those neighborhoods while displacing them, this actually has an opportunity to build some wealth for the people that are being displaced. So it's a little bit more complicated.
If those agreements are happening in a fair way, I have a feeling that's a lot more nuanced.
Yeah. But I think it's an interesting thing for us to think about. And frankly, like our country is so large that it's hard to pay attention to what's going on in other parts of the country in a lot of detail because we're so concerned about our own immediate areas. But I think that is a trend or something to be thoughtful about because we all have most of us have urban and rural neighbors, right? And other venues and friends that work in those spaces. So how are those trends potentially going to affect us in our own communities and our own states as people do work remotely? Remote work is still on the rise. There's a lot of different things happening with the economy. So I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. Thank you so much, Chris, Emily, and Benji for joining me for this conversation. I think we all learned a lot today, and I'm looking forward to making good on my promise and making it out to Montana sometime soon to see you all. And that's it for There's No Business Like this week. Please join us again next week. See ya.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh, wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.
And I was also thinking about how many car accidents are caused by cows there.
Well, interesting. You should bring cows back up, Josh. Do you all want to guess how many cows there actually are in Montana versus people?
I'm going to guess 3.1.
When you say versus people, like these are the ones that are fighting people?
Yes.
Okay.
No, there's 1 million people, approximately 1 million people in Montana.
Okay.
How many cows are there?
5 million.
10 million. 4.
Okay, Danielle's actually the closest. In 2024, the USDA estimated there's 3 million cows in the state of Montana.
Wow. Well, there were actually 9,612 cow-caused automobile accidents.
No way.
In the last year in Montana.
Wow.
There were 17,000 deer-caused accidents, so it's not the leading cause of animal accidents, but it is the second.
Okay, that's interesting.
42,000 raccoons and almost 20,000 coyotes, and then 17,000 deer.
Wow.
And actually, there's more bears.
Heaven, are you laughing?
Killed.
Just like, what
cows.
fucking roadkill statistics site are you on?
I'm on the Great Falls Tribune.
Okay, before
we're all like horrified, and Kevin's giggling over there.
It's like, what the fuck?
Kevin's out here running over crocs. He's like, what are you guys talking about?
Just call them speed bumps around here.